All right, folks, apparently a top U.S. military commander is saying that the North Korean threat is not only the worst he's ever seen it or that it's ever been, but he's also saying that the North Korean threat to Hawaii is actually very real and should be taken very seriously. And so, again, we see these signs of the times continue to unfold here as the tensions escalate here in this region regarding the Korean Peninsula. We know just down in the Philippine Sea, basically, not far away from the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. Navy Strike Group is there right now with other vessels, including a nuclear submarine. And things have, we've seen that in recent reports quite extensively. But this piece here, which I'll link you up with, goes on to say here that the Pentagon needs to consider deploying new anti-ballistic missile systems and a defensive radar to Hawaii to protect against a growing threat from North Korea. The top U.S. military officer in the Pacific told Congress on Wednesday. Kim Jong-un is clearly in a position to threaten Hawaii today, he said, and this man is Admiral Harry Harris, the chief of U.S. Pacific Command. And that's a great handle there, Harry Harris. But apparently this is what he told the House Armed Services Committee. And he said that I have suggested that we consider putting interceptors in Hawaii that defend it directly, and that we look at a defensive Hawaii radar as well. And then it goes on to say that the U.S. currently has an anti-missile interceptors at the Vandenberg Air Force Base there in California, and it says also in Fort Greely, Alaska. But Harris was repeatedly questioned, apparently, it says in the report here, by the lawmakers from Hawaii on the threat posed to their state. And he said the current defense architecture is sufficient to protect Hawaii today, but it can be overwhelmed, he cautioned. Somewhere we would have to make a decision about which missiles to take out, and that's a hard decision. And so it could get to that point, he's warning. And Harris goes on to warn that North Korea's testing is picking up speed and becoming more aggressive. The country conducted more than 20 ballistic missile tests just last year. And they're working on their 6th nuclear test. Goes on to mention here in a quote, Harris goes on to say, North Korea vigorously pursued a strategic strike capability in 2016. He told the lawmakers on Wednesday. He said Kim's strategic capabilities are not yet an existential threat to the United States, but if left unchecked, he will gain the capability to match his rhetoric. Many experts believe much of what Mr. Harris believes, but they differ that some really believe that North Korea already has the sufficient technology to reach, at the very least, Hawaii for sure. And I'll show you a chart that was released in a report by The Guardian not long ago on the range, apparently. I mean, you take it with a grain of salt, right? On the range of these North Korean missiles. And it shows a very real threat to Hawaii, right? And we'll look at that in a second here, but it goes on to mention that the chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, which oversees all military operations in the region, testified a few hours before the entire U.S. Senate was scheduled to go to the White House for a rare classified meeting to discuss the North Korean threat particularly. And Harris stressed to lawmakers that there is a sense of urgency here and that the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group, which has positioned itself in the Philippine Sea, can now reach North Korea in a 2-hour flight, he said. So they're right there ready in case. And he goes on to say, with every test, Kim Jong-un moves closer to his stated goal of a preemptive nuclear strike capability against American cities. And Harris goes on to say that defending our homeland is my top priority. So I must assume that Kim Jong-un's nuclear claims are true. And it goes on to mention here, he dismissed North Korea's threats to sink the aircraft carrier and its strike group, saying if it flies, it will die. Basically, anything they shoot out would be taken out before it could make impact. But it goes on to say here that, echoing President Donald Trump, he said, the military has to consider every possible option when dealing with North Korea, but also cautioned that the objective should be to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses, not to his knees. So he's basically insinuating, let's try to not get to all-out war, which is where it appears to be headed. I mean, actions speak louder than words, folks, and that rings true here in this situation. But I'll link you up to it. He goes on to say some very interesting quotes about what's going on in the Korean Peninsula and the dangers there. But it's consistent with what we've been hearing from all the other world leaders about how very real this situation is. And so here's a map that was included in a report by The Guardian. And it was dated, this one was actually dated 2009, if I'm not mistaken here. And so you can only imagine the increased capabilities that could potentially be there since then. But then, this was the perceived range of the North Korean missile threat. And you can see it here, that it just basically, you can get some of the U.S., well, you get some of Canada in there for sure, but perhaps they could get a little bit extra and reach the mainland, who knows. But Hawaii is certainly well within the range here, and of course, U.S. allies, Japan and South Korea, obviously, within range as well. And all the U.S. military not installations, but their deployments that are all throughout the region here, even in the South China Sea, right? So I wanted to include that briefly, but again, the senior U.S. Navy officer that is overseeing military operations in the Pacific region basically told that lawmakers in Congress on Thursday that the North Korean crisis is the worst he's ever seen, testifying that it's only a matter of time before Kim Jong-un has the capability of launching a nuclear warhead toward the United States. And he basically goes on to talk a little more in the report here, and I'll link you up to it. And let me pull it up on the screen quick. And it goes on to mention here in a quote from Harris, he says, "The crisis on the Korean Peninsula is real, the worst I've seen." And this is from the commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, Admiral Harry B. Harris, Jr. And he says that there is some doubt within the intelligence community whether Kim Jong-un has the capability today or whether he will soon, but I have to assume he has it. The capability is real, and he's moving towards it. And obviously this is a man that's privy to classified intelligence information on the matter, and so again, we're seeing it come to the forefront, the realistic possibility of the nuclear threat to the U.S., but that threat still lies for South Korea, Japan, and of course Hawaii, as we've seen. And as things continue to heat up here, who knows where it might go as these signs of the times continue to unfold and the wars and rumors of wars continue to intensify to unprecedented levels never before seen. I talked about it many times. The world is spending more now on military than at any other time in human history. You can talk about World War I, World War II, even the Cold War. They're spending more now, and it keeps increasing more and more. And it's certainly a sign of the times. And so I'll link you guys up to these reports, and there you have it. I mean, North Korean... the North Korean missile threat is a realistic danger for Hawaii, according to the top U.S. military commander in the Pacific region. And we know how serious a lot of the situations are in that area. You talk about the South China Sea, you talk about up at the Korean Peninsula, and even in the East China Sea, and so forth. And so he's probably very busy, and this guy's in control of a lot there, and this is what he's talking about. So it's certainly consistent with the escalation that we've been seeing, even though Trump has been softening his tone on the matter recently. But perhaps that's because he's starting to realize that China, when all is said and done, if war were to break out, China has 80% or 80% of North Korea's economy and trade is with China, and they have a mutual defense treaty. Not to mention Russia. I believe Russia would work with North Korea in this event, based on what I've seen in the reports, and I know that Russia and China are massive players in end-time Bible prophecy. You know, you can get into Gog and Magog. You can get into in Daniel 11, the kings of the east that crossed the dried-up Euphrates River. Well, I'll be talking a lot more about that in videos to come. Anyhow, I'll link you guys up with the pieces in the description box below. Until next time, my friends, much love and God bless. And should be taken very seriously. And so, again, we see these signs of the times continue to unfold here as the tensions escalate here in this region regarding the Korean Peninsula. We know just down in the Philippine Sea, basically, goes on to say here that the Pentagon needs to consider deploying new anti-ballistic missile systems and a defensive radar to Hawaii to protect against a growing threat from North Korea. The top U.S. military officer in the Pacific told not far away from the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. Navy Strike Group is there right now with other vessels, including a nuclear submarine. And things have, you know, we've seen that in recent reports quite extensively. But this piece here, which I'll link to Congress on Wednesday, Kim Jong-un is clearly in a position to threaten Hawaii today, he said. And this man is Admiral Harry Harris, the chief of U.S. Pacific Command. And that's a great handle there, Harry Harris. All right, folks, apparently a top U.S. military commander is saying that the North Korean threat is not only the worst he's ever seen it or that it's ever been, but he's also saying that the North Korean threat to Hawaii is actually very real.